Hey there, and welcome to the Reflux Revolution Podcast. I'm Molly Pelletier, a registered dietitian, leader in nutrition for GERD, LPR, and reflux, and the founder of Flora Nutrition. Also a former GERD sufferer for over a decade, and I've been where you are. After years of struggling with reflux symptoms and feeling overwhelmed by conflicting advice, I made it my mission to help you find real, long-lasting relief. In this podcast, we're cutting through the noise, providing practical evidence-based strategies, and giving you the tools to understand and manage your reflux with confidence. So let's dive in. The information shared in this Reflux Revolution podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not meant to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical condition, and it should not replace personalized medical advice from your physician or individualized medical nutrition therapy from a registered dietitian. Always consult your healthcare team before making any changes to your health routine. This podcast offers a holistic perspective to support your well-being, but your body is unique and your care should be too. In today's episode, we are diving into the intersection between eating disorders and digestive issues. It's no secret that digestive issues can bring a lot of challenges with food. But the question is, how do you know if you have an eating disorder and what to do if you think you're struggling with whether an eating disorder or avoidant restrictive eating disorder, ARFID? But the question is, how do you know if you're struggling with disordered eating? And what do you do if your reflux or your digestive issues have really triggered this place of food anxiety, food fear, and restriction that you feel like you can't get out of? So today we have Beth Rosen, who is a weight-inclusive registered dietitian specializing in GI nutrition and disordered eating. She is truly a leader and spearhead of the intersection between GI issues, IBS, and eating disorders. And she has 29 years of experience. She runs a virtual private practice helping clients with IBS, SIBO, reflux, gastroparesis. She's also an educator for dietitians, and she has been published in lots of peer-reviewed journals and is the author of an upcoming book called Gut Goals, which is a practical guide for managing IBS, which is due to come out in 2016. So welcome, Beth Rosen, to the Reflux Revolution podcast. We are so lucky to have her. Without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Beth, thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited about this conversation, and I know our listeners are too. I'd love to start by just asking you how commonly you see eating disorders or disordered eating patterns as an underlying cause of GI symptoms in your practice or just in this general population.
So I don't know if I could give you a number of how many people their GI issues are caused by the eating disorders. But I will say that there's statistics that say up to 98% of people with eating disorders have GI disorders. So my guess is that there are a lot of them, right? But we also don't know if it's the eating disorder or something else that might be triggering a GI disorder, but there's a real crossover. And what we hear a lot in the GI space is if you're working with GI clients, you're also working with eating disorder clients. So that's important to recognize.
Yeah, for sure. And why is that? Can we talk about some of the hidden ways that disordered eating can be driving GI issues?
Yeah, for sure. So if you think about nervosa, for example, the restriction, really not eating often, not eating adequately, that can tell the body to slow the metabolism, slow down digestion to try to preserve what's coming in. And slower digestion can lead to delayed gastric emptying, which is also called gastroparesis. It could lead to constipation, right? If there's not enough food coming in, there's not enough waste going out. Or there just can be slow motility because the body's just doing its best to hold on to every last nutrient, that it's just slowed down digestion. And then, for example, bulimia nervosa, right, where people might be purging, which is self-induced vomiting. That can lead to reflux, as I'm sure you see in your study, where stomach acid is constantly coming in contact with the esophagus. Right, so we see that. So I would say that those are the ones that I see the most. But then there's also like binge eating disorder, where the stomach gets stretched quite often, just not working really well, We see a lot in eating disorders of people just not eating regularly, not eating adequately, and even with variety, right? Lots of food groups get cut out depending on what kind of beliefs there are around food, right? So people might be missing out on things like fiber if they're cutting out all their grains, and that can change how the microbiome works, which can impact the gut, and also the gut-brain connection, how the two talk to each other. So there's that, bidirectional pathway of messaging between the gut and the brain, and that can cause issues like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, right, where the gut just doesn't work how it should.
For sure. We see a lot of that, all of the above at Flora. And one thing also that we see really frequently is sort of a cycle where maybe someone has, they've never been diagnosed with an eating disorder, or they do not identify as having an eating disorder, but we see that there's this, pushing eating off or restricting intake in an effort to maybe prevent symptoms or manage their weight or lose weight. They're restricting. And then that restriction sort of swings the pendulum in the other direction, where now when they do eat, they really can't understand their fullness cue. And they're getting over full multiple times a week, maybe every day, maybe multiple times a day. And that over fullness, overfilling the stomach, it puts a lot of pressure on the lower esophageal sphincter. And because of the restriction, they're sort of swinging in this overeating pattern. And maybe that would be classified, as an eating disorder in some cases, but it's definitely something we see a lot as well.
Yeah. And it could be disordered eating, which is just, subclinical behaviors that look like an eating disorder, but don't meet all the criteria for diagnosis. And as dietitians, we can't diagnose. A mental health expert has to diagnose an eating disorder. But if we suspect it, we can certainly ask questions, do a little screening, and then refer, right? So those folks get some help.
For sure. And one thing, we spoke years ago on my Instagram about this topic. And one thing that I still remember from that previous conversation was I was asking, how prevalent is it that the eating disorder comes after the GI issue? That maybe having GI issues caused disordered eating or food fear. And one thing you said was that that's actually very uncommon. That typically there was disordered eating before, even if it was maybe not in the consciousness or not in awareness.
Yeah, so it's not as common. One of the eating disorders we do see that goes in the opposite direction is something called ARFID. It's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And that's the one eating disorder that's not related to body image. Many of the others, the restriction or the behaviors, are trying to manipulate body size to make the body smaller. And there are beliefs that, the body would be better off if it was smaller. But with ARFID, it's more of a fear of consequences, not body size consequences, but fear of either choking or vomiting or fear of pain. Some people just become disinterested in food because of the discomfort it causes. So we might see that kind of eating disorder, or again, disordered eating behaviors because GI issues are causing such discomfort that maybe foods are cut out of the diet and not brought back in, even though the symptoms are persisting. So we do see it, but it's certainly not as common as we see the other way, where the eating disorder triggers the GI disorder.
Super glad you brought up ARFID. And can you talk a little bit about, someone, if they're listening to this conversation, maybe they're not sure if they're struggling with ARFID, or they're having a lot of food fear around their meals or a lot of fear around their symptoms, and it's causing them to restrict or avoid foods that they're not sure they need to be avoiding. What would be the first step?
Well, first I would screen them for ARFID. And there is something called the NIAS. It's a 9-question screening tools. And I can go through the questions if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that's helpful because we do screen. We have a series of questions. And I find there are some people in our intake who are not sure if they're struggling with an eating disorder. So these questions, I think, would be really, really helpful to hear.
Okay, so there's 3 different categories, 3 different subtypes of ARFID. One is a picky eater, the pickiness. One is about appetite, are they interested in food? And one is about the fear of food, right? So the first couple of questions are about the pickiness. And those are, I don't like to try new foods. I dislike most of the foods that other people eat. The list of foods that I like and will eat is shorter than the list of foods that I won't eat. That makes sense? Did I say that right? Yeah. Okay. And then the next set of questions is about appetite. It's like, I'm not very interested in eating. I seem to have a smaller appetite than others. I have to push myself to eat regular meals throughout the day or eat large enough meals. And even when I'm eating food I really like, it's hard for me to eat a large enough volume at meals. And then the last group of questions is about fear. So I avoid or put off eating as much as possible because I'm afraid of discomfort, choking, or vomiting. I restrict myself to certain types of foods because I'm afraid that other foods will cause discomfort, choking, or vomiting. And I eat small portions and or infrequent meals because I'm afraid of discomfort, choking, and vomiting. So that's the 9 questions that would be asked. And then there's, you tally up the scores and you can find out if somebody is showing signs of ARFID, and then you would refer. As a dietitian, you would refer. But if somebody was to find that online, they certainly could find it themselves online, and they took the questionnaire and they sort of self-diagnosed themselves. They could reach out to a GI psychologist, an eating disorder informed psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, or even with their primary care provider to get help if they don't know of one of these providers.
Perfect. Yeah. I think that's helpful to know kind of where to go to get support. So those are some signs of ARFID. What about the other side we were talking about before with anorexia or even orthorexia? Like, what are some signs that someone is dealing with this type of eating disorder?
Really, we would ask questions during an assessment and see what their answers are. We might ask questions if they have certain foods or food groups they're avoiding because they fear symptoms, if they've reduced the amount of food they take in due to worsening symptoms. Mm-hmm. Then I want to ask them about things that are related to eating disorder, like do they skip meals? Do they restrict food? Do they feel guilty or anxious around food? How often they're weighing themselves and how they feel about the number on the scale. If they're using eating disorder behaviors or what we call compensatory behaviors like self-induced vomiting, excessive exercise, or laxative use. And yes, some people will need laxatives, but there are different kinds. And certainly the amounts and how often you're using them would differ depending on how your constipation is going and whether or not you do have a disordered eating background. Also asking questions about their social behaviors, like do they avoid getting together with people because of fear of symptoms or fear of how people might perceive their eating habits? Where do they spend a significant amount of time thinking about food, digestion, and their body in a way that interferes with their daily life? And typically we should be thinking about food about 20% of our day, right? We're planning meals, figuring out snacks, getting hungry. But somebody who has disordered eating tendencies or an eating disorder is probably thinking about food more than 50% of the time.
That's definitely a question I'll ask too when I see a client who, presents with health anxiety too. Like those thoughts about our symptoms, thoughts about food could be 80% of the day or more. And so I think I just wanted to lay the foundation there of what are signs of eating disorders, because where I think there's a gray area is, and what I wanted to ask you is, how can someone differentiate between intentional food restriction for disordered eating, like as you were mentioning, or for weight management or whatever reason, versus intentional food restriction for symptom management? I think that's tricky. I think
it could be a fuzzy line, right? Mm-hmm. It depends on, if you're asking questions about their relationship with food, then you're getting information about what their relationship with food has been since childhood. Like, were they restricted? Were they on diets? Did their parents talk badly about their own bodies or their body? Right. And that can speak a lot to how somebody thinks about the body. Have they been on a lot of diets? Because dieting is one of the triggers for eating disorders. So, are they coming to you saying things like, I eat clean, I follow paleo, I eat low carb? These might sound like harmless dieting techniques to make your body smaller, but they become really rigid and can change brain chemistry and cause eating disorders to be on diets. Asking questions about diet history is important. I think also when we think about people worrying about pain, Are they worrying about the GI pain, the discomfort? Are they worrying about how they're going to feel if they eat it physically rather than emotionally? Is it emotional? Is it, I'm worried I'm going to feel badly in my body? Am I worried that I'm not following the diet rule that's been ingrained in my head? Or am I worried I'm not going to make it to the bathroom if I eat this? Am I afraid that I'm not going to be able to sleep through the night from the pain? Those are two different reasons. So while there's not a validated tool to assess people with GI disorders and eating disorders, there are tools to assess eating disorders. But if you have a GI disorder, they're not valid. There's only one, and it's for people with celiac disease. And that's such a small population. So we really do just have to ask a lot of questions and create a relationship with our patients so that they feel comfortable answering these questions and not feel like they're being stigmatized or blamed or shamed for the behaviors that they're participating in.
Absolutely. And I think, one of our main goals with our clients is to identify, are they avoiding way too many foods? Most people come to us and they have eliminated such a long list of foods and they may not need to be eliminating that many things. Like, of course, there's a time and place when someone is suffering with GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, or LPR, that they may need to pause acidic foods because those are burning on contact. They're causing a lot of symptoms. But there's also often these long lists of foods that have been eliminated that really don't need to be, like gluten and dairy and all sugar. And these things are not inherently reflux triggers. And so they get eliminated because of certain maybe diet books they've read. There's a lot of diet books out there in the acid reflux space, any health space, but in the context of acid reflux, some of these books are extremely rigid and extremely restrictive past the point that is necessary for people to see progress with their reflux. And what we see so frequently is people just getting stuck in these diet rules. So oftentimes, there's certain aspects of that book that may have been helpful, but then they can't get out of it. And it becomes like a disordered eating pattern where they're afraid to have any breads with gums in them or any almond milks with additives. You know what I mean? These rules is that really helpful?
Right. So, the way I approach my clients, even with reflux, is that even though we know there are known triggers for reflux, like you said, acidic foods, spicy foods, high fat meals, stretching your stomach beyond fullness, right? All these things that can trigger, not every food is going to be your trigger, right? So how I typically start is I don't take anything away and start with, let's just do some curious observation and keep a journal. Keep a journal of your symptoms, keep a journal of what you're eating, and let's see if there's a correlation. Let's see if we can find a cause too, right? Because there's a difference between correlation and causation. It might just be happening at the same time because maybe that's a stressful moment and maybe stress is triggering your reflux and not the food itself. It just so happens that you eat this food when you're sitting in school before this class that you really don't like. Right. So that could be a trigger. So if we separate it, we can see. I also like to bring people to awareness that they pulled out these foods, but they came to me and they have symptoms. So did pulling out the foods really help? Or is it the nocebo effect where it's, if I put it back in, it's going to cause me harm more than I feel now, even though it's not helping for it to be out of the diet. And I also think that there's some negligence going on between actual doctors and Dr. Reddit and Dr. Google who say, gluten and dairy needs to be taken out for every reason. And unless you have a dairy allergy or a gluten allergy or a wheat allergy or celiac disease, you do not need to avoid those foods. In most cases, you do not need to avoid those foods. So a lot of the time I spend with clients is debunking myths, sharing science, and trying to make them feel safe around these foods so that we can do reintroduction, because having good variety in your diet, especially of plants, really helps your microbiome grow. And when your microbiome is diverse, that's the sign of a healthy gut. So that piece is really important to work to add those foods back in. But I'm with you, that's the challenge of being a dietitian right now, is fighting all of the influencers and fake whomever are saying these things or saying anecdotal things like, this works for me, maybe it'll work for you. Well, that's not science. That's opinion, right? Or that's somebody else's experience. That's not everybody's experience. When it comes to science, the information has to be repeated over and over again, and they have the same outcome to be able to know that thing actually caused the next thing. right? And we do know that spicy feed can trigger acid reflux, but dairy is not triggering acid reflux. In fact, dairy might feel good because it, has a high residue. It might coat the esophagus going down. So we don't want to rule that out.
Exactly. I think that's so important. And social media, it can be a really scary, confusing place, especially for people with reflux, digestive issues, because there's these claims being made by people who may even be doctors or, functional nutritionists. Like they have these titles that seem like they may be credible. And it's so important that we really question where these claims are being made. And I totally agree. The statements that everyone needs to avoid dairy, everyone needs to avoid gluten it can add to that rigidity where people are like, I have to remove this food now. I have to take this out. And I love the aspect of this food journal because it can be so empowering for clients that are dealing with this anxiety around food to see maybe it's not the food. And it's not 99% of our clients. I don't have an exact statistic, but a huge amount of our clients eventually realize food is actually not their biggest reflux trigger. They come to see that it's actually the way that they eat, the meal speed. If they're chewing their food, if they're having a really high stress day, if they went too long without eating and then had a super large meal, like there's so many non-food triggers. So we're always trying to separate, like, just because you get a symptom after that food doesn't mean that food is now off limits, that food is scary. It could be other aspects. So I totally agree. I think the food log is really helpful in the context of food anxiety, disordered eating behaviors with GI issues.
Mm-hmm. And with some patients, I might just say, I don't need to see it. Just keep a log of your symptoms and what you're eating. And if you see a connection, let's go over that piece or share that with me or let me know your insights. Because for people with eating disorders and disordered eating, they may not want to share what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or, for people with binge eating disorder, they're not going to share what they eat during their binge. They might not even know. Lots of people dissociate during that. So to reduce the chance that somebody would feel shame around me, I usually say, keep it on your own and we can talk about it. Lots of times they'll want to show it to me because they trust me, but for the most part, I'm not asking to see it. So I think, you've lived in your body for as long as you've been alive. You're the professional knowledge holder of what's in that body. So you get the opportunity to share what you're feeling and how you're experiencing certain foods. And that's the information I want from a client, not what they heard, on TikTok.
ChatGPT.
That's right. ChatGPT makes stuff up. When ChatGPT doesn't know, it makes stuff up. So that's something to be careful about too.
For sure. Speaking of technology, social media, do you have any strategies that you share with your clients when they're, being really impacted by the messages they're seeing, like ways to filter or set boundaries on social media to kind of protect them?
Yeah, get off of it. No, I'm just kidding. I know that's nearly impossible. I'm not kidding, but I'm kidding. No, I would say curate your feed if you're watching something and you're not, I want you to be a critical thinker. I want you to ask if that's true and where this person gets this data. If it doesn't feel like it just feels too good to be true, it's probably not. And I would just curate the feed to take out those people that make you feel badly about what you're doing. So for things like what I eat in a day with fill-in X disease, get rid of those. Because most of the time, those people are not eating enough. That diet wasn't something that was given to them by a professional registered dietitian, right? And it's just a way for them to feel morally better than someone else based on the food they chose. And most likely, there's lots of fun foods going on in the background that didn't end up in the video, right? So I would say curate the feed, find hashtags or professionals that you want to follow. And then if you're not sure about information, bring that information to your healthcare professional. It's like, what do you think about this? Right? That part's really important. I also want to put it out there that information begets more information on that topic. So if you're looking through YouTube for reflux and you watch one reflux video, all the other stuff that's going to be shown in your algorithm is going to be reflux stuff. But if you're following some influencer, that's who's going to show up in your algorithm, not Molly, right? So it might be somebody else. So I do think it's important that you have to be careful what you're watching, what you're listening to, what you're reading. Make sure it comes from sources that give references.
So important. Yeah, absolutely. One thing I've noticed with our clients is some of these ARFID behaviors or binge eating behaviors in specific can almost pop up again, even if maybe their eating disorder, they feel it's in remission, or they can pop up again during times of stress. Is that something that you also see with eating disorder behaviors maybe changing with times of stress?
Yeah, eating disorders, while people begin engaging them for different reasons, whether it's genetics or trauma or diet history, they're really essentially coping tools for that person. The eating disorder starts as a coping mechanism. And so for people who have been doing it a long time, it's a really easy tool to use. So I do see those things coming back into play. But I like to tell people about neuroplasticity, which is how your brain can create a new neural pathway with practice. So I liken it to like a field with really high grass. And if you can picture that there's a path through the grass that's really easy to walk through, that's your normal coping skill, right? It's easy. It's the path of least resistance. You walk through it. But if you're trying to create a new pathway and new coping mechanism, you're, high-kneeing it through the grass. And it's really hard to get through, and, it's much slower. But the more you go down that same new path, the more you'll wear it in, right? Mm-hmm. So it becomes easier. And at the same time as you're doing that and you're avoiding the other path gets to grow back in, right? So it's not as easy to go down because it's not really, you can't really find it anymore in the grass, right? So creating new neural pathways is a great way to create some new coping mechanisms, right? The goal of eating disorder recovery is not necessarily to never practice disordered eating behaviors again, but it's to minimize them as much as possible by creating new tools that will help them cope with whatever leads them to use the eating disorder behaviors in the first place.
I love the idea of creating a toolbox. This is something that I talk with my clients a lot. And I think usually we start by thinking about just what do they like? Like, what are their interests? And this is something that gets lost if you're really focusing on your disordered eating or digestive issues. Sometimes we lose, who are we? What do we like? And so we write lists of gardening, Nordic culture, reading, playing guitar, whatever it is. And sort of these things could be part of your toolbox. And maybe it's not even engaging in gardening or engaging in these hobbies, but even just learning about them and watching a YouTube video on that instead, or going to the library and reading about open water swimming, whatever it is that you're interested in. Having these other facets of your life is a great way to have more coping skills. Because of course we think, I love yoga and meditation. We have the Flora app for that. And I think yoga and meditation can be amazing, but different strokes work for different folks. And sometimes it is expanding what is our toolbox? Who are we? What brings us joy? What fills us up? And I have seen that be really helpful as we try to build more coping skills that maybe don't involve food or restriction.
I do that with my clients as well. And what I say to them is try one of those coping skills first, whether it is gardening or looking up gardening, whether it's taking a walk or petting a dog or laying on the floor, because sometimes just grounding yourself helps, and trying that first before using one of the eating disorder behaviors. It also makes you more mindful, keeps you in the moment, right? To really focus on how do I feel in this moment? I'm worrying about what's coming next. Am I worrying about something that happened? Or can I take space right here to just sort of take a breath, realize I'm safe, I'm worried about this, but it's not happening right. Use one of my skills and do that instead. I smiled when you started talking about searching different things, because that's another way to curate your social media feed, because mine is filled with knitting, crocheting, and fart jokes. Right? It's and my Geon humor's in there, and then really pretty yarn.
Yeah, interior design. Yeah, whatever you like. That is a really good way.
Right.
That's a great idea to diversify.
And puppies.
Yeah. Cute animals for sure.
Puppies. Right.
Awesome. Well, this was super helpful. I would love to ask you one last question. If you have any other favorite strategies or approaches, I know the toolkit I think is super, super helpful, but is there anything else you'd like to share with those who might be dealing with some sort of disordered eating and digestive health issues?
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to advocate for themselves. And if you're not used to speaking out for yourself, it's a good idea to practice, have that conversation in the mirror or write down some things you want to say, but make sure you get heard when you see your doctor. They only have about 15 minutes to see you, at least in the United States. So write down everything you want to say and write down all their answers. If you need your questions answered, certainly you can do it in that form. But I think learning to ask for what you need. If you're saying I'm in pain, do not leave without a solution for managing the pain, or next steps to be referred someplace. It's really important to become your own advocate.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the referral, because I think a lot of people with digestive health issues, reflux, they feel like at a dead end if they don't get that answer or support in the session. And even just knowing to ask, like, who can you refer me to if you can't help me? Like, it's a really good idea. So thank you so much. This was amazing. If you want to learn more or learn more about you, where can they go?
Yeah. So, regular patients, people, can come to my website, which is at BethRosenRD.com. I'm also on Instagram at BethRosenRD. And for practitioners, I have a new book out that I co-authored with a number of GI and eating disorder experts, comprehensive nutrition therapy for co-occurring gastrointestinal and eating disorders. And it's available at Barnes & Noble or anywhere you get books. And it comes with 12 CEUs for those who want continuing ed credits to learn about the co-occurrence of GI nutrition and eating disorders and how to treat those clients so that we can take better care of these folks.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. If you're listening and you're not on video, dietitians, I have Beth's book, and Beth is really spearheading this movement of eating disorders and GI. So definitely recommend her book and her work. Thank you so much. This was really, really amazing. I really appreciate it.
No, this is fun for me too. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'll end the recording here and I'll do like a little outro for the podcast, but this was really great. Thank you.
I think fast.
We covered a lot in like a short time. Like we were only recording for maybe like 34 minutes. So I think this is a great, short and sweet, effective episode.
Good. When do you think you'll put it out? Or you'll let me know?
Yeah, probably like 3 to 4 weeks. I'll definitely let you know. I'll send you all the links.
Send me links, send me social assets, because I'll put it on my website for it to live. So, and then I'll put it out on my socials also.
Perfect. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks. Enjoy. When do you move into the house? Are you closed?
We're here right now. There's literally like nothing. I'm here right now. Yeah, my partner is in California. We still have an apartment there, and his job is based there. But both of our families are here, and I've been coming back all the time because my mom is here, and I'm her primary caretaker. So we just needed to be here. But
were you living in California before, or are you long distance?
Yeah, we're both living in California there before.
That's a big move.
Big move. There's very few things in this home right now. It's just my desk, a couple couches.
It'll fill up. It'll fill up.
Yeah. Just step by step. We're doing all the fun stuff, getting new heating system, because this is a really old house.
That's not the fun. No. Getting heating system and a roof, not fun.
we need both of those things. And we knew that. Prior to moving.
We got a good deal then.
Yeah, we did. We did get a good deal, which was good. But I was like, oh gosh, I knew this was going to be a headache. But little by little, chipping away at it.
Well, welcome home. It's a good time to introduce your partner to the East Coast, right? Oh, you said that you went to school together, right?
Yeah, he's from here too. His family's here, so they've been popping in and helping. Yeah, and we come back here all the time. So this would be our home base here, and then I'll be here primarily, and I'll still go back to California though. We won't go more than a few weeks without seeing each other.
How long will he be out there?
I think he needs to be there for work at least a couple more years.
Goodness.
I know.
This is to take care of mom. You're a good kid.
Yeah. And it's only we'll see how the next couple of years go. We've been able to kind of come back and forth, and I'm here maybe a little bit more than half the year, but I just kind of need a home base when we were here to and everything. Yeah. We'll see how things shake out.
Yeah. I hope it goes well. Enjoy the holiday weekend.
You too. Are you doing anything fun?
I don't know if it's fun, but I'm getting together with my family.
Nice.
My mom. Yeah.
Are they in Honolulu?
My brothers are. My mom lives in Manhattan, so she'll come out for the day with my stepfather. Yeah. So it's just not going to be warm, so I don't know if it'll be fun, but it'll be fine. We're just going to be inside, which is, not as much fun as being out. So he has a pool. It's not as much fun as being outside.
Right. I know. I'm like hoping the weather's wrong and maybe it'll burn off, but we'll.
Even if it was 75 degrees, the pool's going to be an icicle.
Oh,
I'm sure it's heated, but I don't know if it could heat that fast.
No. Yeah. No. Well, I hope you enjoy. Thank you again for your time. I'll definitely keep you posted.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Thanks. All right. Well, stay in touch. I'm excited to read your book as well. Really excited.
Thanks. It was very nice for the buy you one.
I know, right? She's the best. I'll chat with you soon.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Bye.